Welcome all Gothamites to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond. Everyone welcome, please, Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hello, Andrea.
Hi, Brian.
It's good to be back. It's good to be talking about a fun episode with a character we've never seen before in Batman, the animated series, or the new Batman Adventures. Are you excited?
I'm super excited. And this character introduces some interesting psychological facets, a topic actually that we've never covered before on the show, and then a topic that we're going to revisit. So I think it'll be a good show.
Yeah, it's going to be a great show. It's a good episode. Before we get to that, though, I want to read a little note that was sent to you. Someone who is a relatively new listener of the show, but had a wonderful email. And if it's okay, I'm going to read a little bit of it.
Okay.
It says, "Hi, Andrea. A couple of months ago, I discovered a podcast called The Arkham Sessions." I know that podcast.
That's us.
And seeing that it combined Batman, the animated series, with psychology, I decided to give it a listen. After listening to a couple episodes, I was so immersed into this show. It was and is entertaining, funny, and informative about the various topics about psychology. Plus, it was about one of my favorite shows. After listening to a few more episodes, I discovered more about the two hosts, and I was surprised and very happy to learn that not only were you an actual clinical psychologist, but this podcast was your way of decreasing the stigma of mental illness and increasing awareness of mental illness. As a person who struggles with mental illness and has been for the past 4 years, you are an absolute inspiration and hero to me. Whenever you discuss mental illness in a respectable way and with accurate knowledge on your show, I feel like someone is acknowledging me, that someone understands what I have to go through, and I find that to be very rare today because I think mental illness is something that people want to ignore. The fact that you not only work on this podcast with Brian, but that you also present various talks at a variety of conventions and events is starting to inspire me to try the same. I have been pretty good at public speaking lately, despite my anxiety. But talking to people and educating them about mental illness, but also about the other topics of social justice is something I have been considering, and what you do is one of the reasons why. I usually don't write to people I've never even met before like this, but I just wanted to because I wanted to thank you for all that you have done and all that you do. Thanks again, Diana. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Diana. That's so very sweet and actually very personal. And I appreciate that you shared that with us. And I just am very touched that people are realizing that the importance of the show is to just increase knowledge about psychology and mental illness and interventions and access to interventions, and that we're doing it in a way that's relatable and accessible. And a huge part of that that's important for me is that it's free and that people can listen to the show. So it's so great to hear feedback from folks who discovered it and who feel good about some of the topics, and then maybe have made some interesting and helpful choices for themselves.
For sure.
So thank you so much, Diana, for sharing that with us and for being brave to tell your story.
Yeah, I mean, it's letters like that remind me of why we decided to do this in the first place. Let's talk about this episode.
Okay.
We're talking about Torch Song. And this one is interesting because it's the very first time that we are introduced to a very old DC Comics character by the name of Firefly. For those who don't already know Firefly, you should probably watch this episode, Torch Song. But, I mean, Garfield Lens, he's been around since the early 1950s. The interesting thing about Garfield Lens, because there are a couple of different iterations of the character, but there are also a couple of iterations of Firefly. This one definitively in this episode is Garfield Lens. The cool thing about this character is that for the most part, he's usually been a special effects coordinators, some sort of pyrotechnician, someone who deals with fire and explosions on movie sets. In this particular case, it's not a movie set, but he could be.
Yeah, it's a stage. It's entertainment. But you're saying that he has professional knowledge. He's an expert in pyrotechnics.
Right. Now, in a couple of different versions of the character in the comics, even dating back way back when, he has had these sort of tendencies for pyromania, and that has, I was going to say no pun intended, but you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and intend this. It has fueled his campaign, but I like that this episode doesn't necessarily play that card too much. Let's talk about it. We start out with a pop singer, very similar to the sort of, I don't know, I would even go so far as to say maybe even a Lady Gaga today. Mm-hmm. Lots of spectacle, lots of hype, lots of lights and pyro around her. Not much other stage design. It's basically a 3 or 4 tiered cake that she's standing on top of. Bruce Wayne is there to see a concert. Barbara Gordon is also there to see a concert. Not there together.
They're not on a date. They're separate.
They are separate. And a little, I would say, surprised to see one another there. Bruce is on a date, though. Mm-hmm. He's there with a girl, Shannon. We have no idea who Shannon is.
I've never seen her before. I kind of like her, though.
Really? Why is that?
I don't know. She's kind of sassy.
She is sassy. I'm thinking that she is Candy for, the Bruce Wayne persona.
Okay.
That kind of, she is the girl that Bruce Wayne is hanging out with, but clearly wouldn't. Because when we think of the girls that Bruce really likes, the Selena Kyles and
Talia,
those folks.
Yeah.
This girl's not one of them.
No. And you don't like that?
I just don't think that she would be. I don't think that Bruce Wayne. I don't think Bruce would.
Okay, you're saying that there's not much depth to her.
There doesn't appear to be a whole lot of depth.
Okay, that's fair.
They are seeing this show, Cassidy, a one-namer, and she is the hottest thing in music right now.
That's 2. You only get 3 the whole episode.
Yeah, this whole thing is about to blow up.
Now you're done. No, that's it.
And
3 strikes and you're fired.
You almost got through.
Yeah.
That. Cassidy, we see her backstage. She's hanging out with Garfield Lenz. Apparently, the two of them have a little bit of a history.
I remember when you used to dress like that for me.
Gar, we have a show to put on, remember?
Don't worry, Cass. I won't disappoint you. My job is the only thing I care about now.
I mean, honestly, whenever you hear that kind of stuff, just as a woman, it's over. It's done. Like, no one wants that.
Right.
So and I think that's a part of this writing, when he says that to her, you kind of get these red flags. You know that this guy is trouble.
We do know he's trouble, but we also, I think, maybe not in this scene, but I think Cassidy is trouble as well.
Oh, she definitely is.
Yeah, there were plenty of red flags for her throughout the episode.
Whatever you thought we had is as cold as a burnt out fuse.
So she's salty, and she's clearly
Superstar.
Yeah, she's coming across as a bit of a diva, I think. Mm-hmm. And she's clearly very talented, and she has a bunch of fans who adore her, and her image is really important. So she relies on this guy. He's the guy that does the pyrotechnics for her show. Mm-hmm. So they are going to continue to have this professional relationship, even though we know there's kind of a bad history between them.
The professional relationship is officially over, which is weird to me. In that moment, she is firing him, and yet allows him to go operate the pyrotechnics of her show?
It's the last show.
It's still, why would you make someone angry like that and then go like, hey, I need you to go operate the fire for me? the fire that I'm going to be very close to on this stage.
I guess I would have done it after the show.
Yeah. You always fire people on Friday at the end of the workday. It gives them the weekend to think things over and not come back and hurt you in some way. You don't do it right before your concert where you're going to be engulfed in flame tonight a little higher than normal.
Right.
Because he does. He cranks it up, nearly burns down the place, and
everybody in that venue is essentially threatened by this. Like, they could have all lost their lives. This was a huge explosion. And of course, luckily Bruce Wayne is there. So,
except Bruce is not the one we get to credit for rescuing Cassidy. It's Batgirl. Batgirl swoops in because we get a kind of creepy line from Bruce. Let's take a listen.
Good girl.
I actually really liked that moment. It reminded me of Carrie Kelly in Frank Miller's comic, where he it's actually a pretty pivotal moment in the comic, and he's holding on to her and he says, "Good soldier."
Yeah, but there's a difference between good soldier and good girl.
I think it's the same kind of idea.
So after Cassidy is saved, the police, including Harvey, they all go to Lynn's home and try to find him. He's not there. Shocker.
I mean, they know who did this. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, you would think. But something that we didn't necessarily, I didn't anyway, expect was that there would be sort of this weird altar, this sort of shrine, very stalkery, lots of candles, lots of posters and photos of Cassidy.
Right. It's like almost like a horror movie or a murder thriller movie where the detective discovers hidden in the home just a collage of pictures and all sorts of,
usually in a dark room somewhere.
Yeah, and candles lit.
Mm-hmm. He just lets the candles. He just lets the
Well, he can manage that. He knows.
He's not in the house. He's gone.
He's got some plan for it.
Okay.
But it is kind of, I mean, again, looking at like this is an animated show. How are we supposed to interpret that? Like that particular scene is a very adult idea. So what is this guy doing? He's obsessing over this woman. He's looking at pictures of her. He's he has this shrine. He's I don't know, it has this like strange, bizarre, upsetting tone to it.
Mm-hmm. At Cassidy's place, it's equally upsetting because she's there talking with her agent, and a letter is delivered that basically is a threat. Let's play the letter now.
The star that burns brightest burns fastest.
And then suddenly this letter just burns up in her hands. It's not just flash paper, it's self-igniting flash paper,
right.
Apparently. Yeah, if anybody is going to be pointed at for something like this, it's going to be your pyrotechnician special effects guy.
Right.
What I like about this version of the Firefly character is that he isn't a pyromaniac per se. He's just a guy who clearly knows his weapon. Mm-hmm. It's not that he's got a desire to light things on fire.
Right.
It's not even a compulsory desire to light things on fire. He's just a guy who is, if it were water, he would figure out a way to use water. If it were ice, he would figure out a way to use ice. If it were
clay
or dolls, or, if he's just got a tool that he knows a whole lot about and he's
right.
using it.
Right.
So I kind of like that. Let's talk a little bit about that facet of the character, though, because, people have thought of Firefly as this pyromaniac.
Well, I think one thing we have to do is agree on a construct for pyromania. As we've been using it in the show, I think we were agreeing that when we say he's a pyromaniac, that he's obsessed with fire and and lighting things up, and as you said, using fire to get what he wants. But the clinical term pyromaniac is more of an impulse control disorder.
Right.
And actually, you were pretty spot on. You're a good psychologist in training to note that it has a lot to do with this compulsion, this desire, this urge to light things on fire, to see things burn. And I do want to note that, of course, the clinical term pyromaniac or pyromania has a number of different criteria. And so I wanted to quickly list those off so you can put that into perspective.
Okay.
So the deliberate and purposeful fire setting is apparent or is present on more than one occasion. So it's not like just a one-time thing. It's a pretty repetitive pattern. Tension or effective arousal before the act. So again, the idea that by lighting something on fire, it alleviates that tension. It's, again, this kind of more impulsive act. Fascination with and curiosity around fire, even attraction to fire, and its situational context, paraphernalia, uses, consequences. Pleasure, gratification, or relief when setting fires or when witnessing or participating in their aftermath. And the fire setting is not done for monetary gain as an expression of sociopolitical ideology. So you just want to keep in mind that this doesn't have some secondary gain. Again, it has that more emotional, impulsive aspect to it. And of course, it's not better explained by some other problem. I do want to note that fire setting as a symptom could be indicative of some other larger conduct problem.
Right.
And so when you see fire setting behaviors amongst young, children, teenagers, there might be a pattern of other behaviors that are disruptive or that are odd and even antisocial, like torturing or harming animals, being disruptive, not attending school, just kind of more problematic behaviors that seem in a pattern with things like fire setting.
Right.
So breaking rules, breaking laws, stealing, things like that. It's hard for me to identify this character as having pyromania because I don't know that we're seeing that urge to set something on fire and then that instant relief about fire setting.
Yeah. I mean, it's very possible that he is relieved by the setting of fire, or it's very possible that he does have all these, but he's not exhibiting them in this episode. He doesn't appear to be a pyromaniac in this episode.
Right.
He's just a really good special effects artist who has decided to take his knowledge and turn it into a weapon. Cassidy goes to a restaurant called Rock City, which is very much like it's a hybrid between Hard Rock Cafe with all the memorabilia from rock stars and things like that. But it's also sort of a hybrid with Planet Hollywood, I think, because there's reference to different celebrities having owned a piece of it, similar to Planet Hollywood back in the day. The Bruce Willis, Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Demi Moore all financed these restaurants, and they all owned a piece of it, and you could go in and see Hollywood memorabilia. So it's almost a cross between Hard Rock Cafe and Planet Hollywood. She is there at this restaurant, and this is the very first time that we see Firefly dressed in his full regalia. Mm-hmm. A fire retardant suit. He's got bombs. He's got the guns that are flamethrowers, essentially.
Right. And Firefly it's not like Clayface or some of these other characters with supernatural abilities. Firefly is manipulating the technology in order to use fire as weapons. And he's created this supervillain persona, essentially. So I don't know. I always like to point out some of those differences when you have characters who have either supernatural, superhuman, or biological aspect to their identity, and then ones that craft and create their weapons and therefore their supervillain identity.
Which do you prefer?
I think I have a little bit more sympathy and I'm a little bit more curious about the characters who have more of a like an enmeshment with their supervillain identity and what it is that they utilize to terrorize or hurt other people. So with Clayface, now he wasn't always made of clay. That happened through the use in this particular version in the animated series through the use of this cream. So I think it's just fascinating to understand it from a perspective of personhood. Whereas when you create and craft something, it's a little bit more separate from you. You can walk away from it, maybe. You're not trapped in it. You're not forced to utilize that. You can find other ways.
I don't know.
No.
Well, the reason I sort of chuckle is you're now describing Batman. And I've not seen Batman able to walk away from having been Batman.
Well, that's something he struggles with, but how do you know that that's not enmeshed with his person? Like, what are you talking about exactly? Bats?
No, just Batman. The persona of Batman.
Right.
The vigilante, the black and white thinking, only I can do this, even though I've got a whole army of children helping me.
Well, but his origin story and his identity as a superhero is his trauma. So he can't walk away from that.
Firefly's origin story is his trauma of having been dumped by the girl that he is madly in love with, so much so that he's decorated his entire house in images of her. I feel for him.
Do you?
No.
No, you don't.
No, not really.
Not after what I'm going to say about his behavior.
Oh, all right. Well, we're going to talk about that because he sets fire to the restaurant. Batman and Batgirl come in and save the day. One has to wonder where Robin is these days. Probably out training. He's still working on the little robots that try to shoot him or whatever in the Batcave. You know, the dead is dead.
Oh, right.
Little
The training room.
Little training room. But Batman and Batgirl end up saving Cassidy yet again. Firefly gets away.
Mm-hmm.
We then end up in Cassidy's apartment again, where her agent is trying to comfort her, leaves, insists that you would have to be Houdini to get in. Instantly, she turns around and there's Batman. I have a question for you. Do you think Batman overheard that and
Yes.
thought to himself, I'm Houdini?
He thinks he's better than Houdini at this point.
Right.
Yeah, I think he heard that.
She turns around, finds him. This is where one of the red flags goes up for me with Cassidy, because she's very flirty, very, she tries to hire Batman as her personal bodyguard. She gets all up in his personal space.
Okay, so
she's like rubbing his chest.
Wouldn't you, if you were her and you were in this situation, wouldn't you try to recruit him in some way to protect you and to be around and to just be a part of your protection?
This is the wrong way to do it. Here's why. If I were going to try to recruit someone like Batman, or if I'm going to recruit Kevin Costner, if I'm going to recruit anybody, I am going to not use my sexuality, because I do not want that person to be distracted by me, or my body, or any other, I want that person to be looking out for me, and she is like seducing him.
It is an awkward scene. It's a little bit uncomfortable because she is putting, I don't know, I guess like really making efforts to flirt with him. It's a performance though. This is her way of, I think, interacting with others. This is probably what she knows best.
So she's probably been like a Miley Cyrus. She has grown up as a...
And it doesn't work. It totally falls flat. He doesn't want any part of that.
That's why you gotta protect me. You're the only one who can. I'll make it worth your while.
I'm not for hire.
That's not why he does this sort of thing.
Just out of curiosity, let's just say for giggles that Bruce Wayne is into Shannon. Do you think he sort of do you think this interaction with Cassidy in any way makes him think less of Shannon, or does he feel bad for Shannon because like the girl, the singer that she loves so much is like such a diva? It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to like people for their art.
Right.
When
like
they're such
really,
awful people.
He's like really starting to see who she is.
He's like, oh, I can't believe I paid for a concert.
And I honestly, I don't think that he likes this kind of person, woman or man, the kind of person who really is thirsty for attention and who needs to be the center of the spotlight, and who, well, I guess the center of the spotlight is the spotlight. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that person who really just demands attention from others, and I don't think he's into that. So something tells me that it's easy for him to put some strong boundaries there and not to respond to her flirting with him.
Batman and Batgirl go and investigate his place, his hideout. They end up finding an entire collection of weapons that he has created. Batgirl sort of throws a switch. It ignites a bomb. The entire place goes up. This is the second time in 2 weeks that the two of them have been searching someone's place and a bomb has nearly killed them. Is this just like the thing? This is just what they do?
I actually think this is how the show has ended for a lot of the episodes. There has to be a giant explosion in a building or a warehouse and people need to crawl out of it, and then the villain, gets taken in. I think that's kind of how everything tends to culminate.
What's interesting is that this is almost a distraction, the two of them searching his place, because meanwhile, Cassidy is rehearsing and all the smoke starts to fill up and they all try to leave the building. Meanwhile, she can't see. Firefly actually leads her to the roof, and it turns out to just have been a smoke bomb. It's not, there's no fire, but Cassidy has now been separated from her bodyguards, and now she is in the clutches of Firefly. Now, something that strikes me as curious is when Batman was in Cassidy's apartment, he began to ask her things like, why is Firefly after you? And, the obvious questions like that. What he didn't ask is, who's Firefly? She openly admitted that she dated him a couple of times, but he never asks who this person is. He never tries to find it. It's almost like Batman is more and more willing to accept suited or costumed villains as who they claim to be, rather than who's behind the mask. Like he doesn't even care. It's just instantly, this guy says he's Firefly. Why does Firefly want you?
Well, I think with this episode, I was also, surprised or just kind of giddy about the idea that once they established that he was Firefly, then from then on, it was like, that's his name. He's Firefly.
He's Firefly.
No one is questioning it or finding it odd, and that's who they're looking for. That's how they refer to him.
It's she doesn't say anything about like, oh, let me tell you something. My pyrotechnician, like the cops all seem to know who he is, you would think, but Batman is that guy who's like, why does Firefly want you? And that to me, I found to be a bit amusing. It's just become so much part of his life that he just accepts it now. Every week, there's going to be somebody in a costume. It's going to be new. Drea, in addition to the second time in 2 weeks that Batman and Batgirl have ignited a bomb in someone's lair, it's the second time in 2 weeks that someone has decided they are going to burn down all of Gotham City. Right. He is going to use this gel for his flame. It's going to ignite. The entire city will burn.
Well, it's sort of taken on an interesting, I don't know, it seems to have shifted, because up till this point, his anger, his feelings of revenge, his need to lash out have all been focused on Cassidy.
Yeah, and instead of, in the same way that Baby Doll and Croc, Baby Doll was willing to destroy the city, including herself and Croc. In this case, Lynn thinks that burning down the city will provide a distraction or some sort of way out. He thinks he and Cassidy can escape the city together and live happily ever after.
And that's kind of why it's a little bit confusing, because at one point he wants to harm her. He could have killed her in the very first scene where he lit up the stage. So it's, and we'll talk about how this behavior is problematic and why it's so alarming and dangerous. But that's kind of the interesting seriousness or I guess like the quickness by which this goes from an isolated thing to then a more dangerous situation.
Yeah. Batman shows up wearing a suit specifically designed to go up against Firefly's.
He's been waiting so long to use this suit. That's why he was so excited about Firefly. This is just hanging in his closet all spring, all summer.
I've been dealing with
Now it's
penguins
fall.
and ice men, and all I've been waiting for is someone with some fire. He gets to use it. No cape on this.
No.
It would.
No need.
Yeah. I found myself wondering if it would just get hotter in there, because it's sort of armor. It's not really.
Yeah.
It's not really like a firefighter's sort of suit. It's more like I'm wearing a suit of armor that happens to not heat up. Apparently, they have their fight. The episode ends naturally in the way that the world works. Ironically, all of this sends Cassidy's career through the roof. She is now in fuego.
So it's almost like the bad press elevated her celebrity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, except at the very, very end, this is why these episodes are so awesome. You know, she lives happily ever after, or she's successful and she's happy and she's, dining somewhere with all of her riches. And then a plate, I guess a server is walking by with a plate that is on fire because it's one of those like sizzling plates where you see a dish being lit, and that's totally normal. But when she sees it, she freezes.
Yeah. What's weird is that her agent is even suggesting that they'd like do this sort of fire themed tour, concert tour.
Yeah, he's not very sensitive to the idea that she may be traumatized by this. And in fact, when we see her freeze and kind of just sit there, it's a little bit of I kind of like that ending as far as
it's very Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it has that twist, just a slight tinge of horror.
Well, we zoom into her eye and we see the flame in her eyes. She's just staring at it. And
obviously from the psychological perspective, that was a trigger. That was something that reminded her of these life-threatening events, and she had these moments of losing focus and potentially of feeling a sense of panic or distress. And so, the body keeps the score. That's what I always say.
Talk a little bit about that, because she is clearly, would you say that she is showing signs of PTSD or some sort of...
No, well, look, we only have one moment. And honestly, it doesn't give us enough information to know. The thing about PTSD is that there's a certain amount of time that's needed to pass between the trauma.
So she's still in the nightmare phase of this just ended.
Well,
somebody could be coming into my house.
It's quite normal to have a reaction to the flame.
Is that flambe meant to be on fire? That. Yeah.
Like, is her reaction normal? Is she just, does it pass very quickly? And that's something that we would need more information on. But just that moment, it doesn't give us enough information.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about Firefly and his obsession, his sort of Stalking.
Yeah, this is definitely stalking. And I know we've talked about stalking before with the Mad Hatter and Alice. And we should probably make some points about how this is a little bit different. With Jervis, who is the Mad Hatter, his intention was to get Alice to be alone with him. He had this infatuation with her. They barely knew each other, and yet he had this, I would say, delusion that they were meant to be. In this case, this is a guy who has been told he's not supposed, he was broken up with, so he's not supposed to be with her. He's been rejected. He's been hurt, and his ego has just been slammed by that. And his behavior is more about revenge, retaliation, but
he still wants to run away with her.
He does want to run away with her, but this is going to sound weird. With Jervis, it had this romantic quality to it that was very unrealistic and, yes, very harmful.
Right.
It was very harmful, obsessional, and inappropriate. But my feelings about Jervis is that he did not want to harm Alice. He actually wanted to kind of take her away and not let anyone else harm her.
Right.
But again, that was a delusion. That was this fixation that he had that was not really grounded in reality. This guy, Firefly, has more of it fits the profile of stalking in the sense that he is attacking this person and he's singling her out and he's potentially thinking of ways to harm her. And I think that we should talk about some of these different types of stalking because not every stalking profile is the same. We've just kind of pointed out two different ones.
Right. So let me ask a question that your answer very well may lead into talking about that. I'm curious, and I don't mean to be funny here. Stalking is one of those things that is terrifying, but at the same time, baffling to me because if she reciprocated, one would suggest there's nothing wrong with him. Mm-hmm. But somewhere in there's something that's not, I don't want to say normal because we don't say that, but I mean, there's something, I don't know if it's a disorder or what, but he is obsessed with this girl. If she reciprocated, things would be fine, but she doesn't. So he gets angry. Jervis gets angry.
Well, if she reciprocated, it would be a relationship not defined by obsession and
that's what I'm saying.
Attacking and gaslighting.
That's what I'm saying. Where does the line exist between being madly in love with a person and stalking? Where does that happen?
Yeah, so let's define stalking. I'm using a study from the San Diego State University about 10 years ago to better define stalking and certainly to talk a little bit more about some of these different types or categories of stalking behavior. Stalking is defined as repeated and unwanted attention, harassment, contact, or any other behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel a sense of fear. So this somewhat answers your question in the identified target needs to experience fear for this to be actual stalking. So we have to be mindful to think of stalking as an interactional relationship construct. The reports from the study found that 2 to 13% of males and 8 to 32% of females are victimized by stalking at some point in their adult lives. So that's, in looking at some of those numbers, women are more likely to experience stalking than men do, but men do experience stalking. And in the majority of cases, the person being stalked knows who their stalker is, so it's not a stranger.
Right.
When victims were asked what they thought motivated their stalkers to pursue them, the majority named things like retaliation, anger, or spite. And I think that's what we're thinking about here with Firefly. And a third said that it was about control. So I think that's somewhat related to Firefly as well. She rejected him and he wanted to have say in that relationship. When we think about his comment about her outfit, did he have any control on her appearance, her image, what she dressed like. I wonder if that was where that was coming from. But the minority of cases involve mental illness or emotional instability, according to this study. And thinking of that, it's interesting that when looking at the majority of stalking behavior, most stalkers do not suffer from delusions, hallucinations. So, again, thinking of maybe Jervis, Mad Hatter, falling into that rare type of stalking, although many do suffer from other forms of difficulties, like some do have symptoms of suicidality or depression, anxiety, things like that. Substance use, certainly.
Well, and that's one of the things that I wanted to ask was, and I think this is kind of boiling it down to what I was getting to a moment ago. Is it possible that stalking is a symptom of another thing? Like, is it possible that if someone who otherwise would be a stalker is in a good relationship, other signs of, or other red flags might pop up?
Usually. And I should be careful to note that stalking is not a disorder. That's
right.
That's a behavior. That's a type of pattern of behavior. So a researcher by the name of Mullen developed kind of a list or a categorical way to profile certain types of stalkers. And this is based on some of the clinical symptoms, some of the patterns that we're seeing among a number of both victims and stalking persons with stalking behavior. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to read a few of these for you so you can let me know, does this fit with Firefly? Does it maybe fit with Mad Hatter?
Okay.
The first one is rejected stalkers. So the most common and the most dangerous type is the rejected stalker who will pursue the victim, often a former intimate partner or romantic partner, after the relationship ends.
Well, I would say it applies to both people, except the second part of that, the former relationship, that would definitely just be Len's.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Intimacy-seeking stalkers. So these are individuals that want an intimate relationship with the victim because they believe it's their true love. Like no one else will do. This is the person they have to be with. And they imbue their victims with special desirability, excellence, and other qualities consistent with their belief of romanticized love. Most have these delusions that the other person does love them back. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes that gets them into these conflicts with that person because it's not true.
So that'd be Jervis.
Yeah, I think this will be the Mad Hatter. It's so funny as I'm reading this. That one says, intimacy-seeking stalkers often require court-mandated psychiatric treatment. Okay, so then we have incompetent stalkers. Incompetent stalkers, I know it sounds like they're not doing their job well.
Boy, they're just bumbling stalkers.
Incompetent stalkers, they know the victim is disinterested, but they forge ahead in hopes that their behavior will lead to a relationship. I think this one is a little bit more passive.
Eventually she'll love me,
yes,
or he will love me.
Exactly. So it's kind of like an incompetent attempts to court them. And unfortunately, these individuals lack an intellectual capacity to understand why their efforts aren't successful. They often have underdeveloped social skills. Unfortunately, I feel like the folks who might fall in this category, I would say that they may not know better. Like they may be kind of fumbling through this and they really need guidance on knowing you have to stop pursuing this person because they don't reciprocate your caring or your romantic feelings toward them. A couple more here, resentful stalkers. So these are folks, now this one is a little bit scary. The resentful stalker intends to frighten and distress their victim. Many have paranoid personalities or may have delusions, but they pursue a vendetta against a specific victim or feel generally aggrieved and randomly choose a victim. And they often feel persecuted and may go about stalking with an attitude of righteous indignation. So I feel a little bit like, Firefly could fall within that category in the sense of him trying to frighten her in the very beginning of the episode. What he was doing to her when she was performing was terrorizing her, essentially. Right. And then finally, the predatory stalker. This one is upsetting. The predatory stalker will physically and sexually assault a person. So they stalk to discover somebody's vulnerabilities. They seldom give warnings. And, often their victim is unaware that then they're in any danger. Mm-hmm. And they're attacked. So that's probably the most extreme version.
Right.
Now, I'd say all of these versions are unacceptable, inappropriate. Nobody should be acting this way. But what I just described is absolutely inappropriate, illegal, assaultive, and certainly should be reported.
Right.
So I would say all these types of behaviors should be reported, but that last type certainly needs attention there. Something I want to make sure to clarify is, okay, so how do I know? What are the signs that this could happen? How do I know that this is going to happen or that there's a potential stalker? And I don't want to generalize, but some of the signs that somebody may be preparing to stalk somebody or that they're in process of stalking have to do with some of their previous history together. We mentioned maybe having a relationship and then there was a rejection or a separation,
right? And
a person responding with feelings of anger, resentment, that sense of vendetta. So looking for some of those signs, but also thinking about some more concrete factual things. Does the person have a criminal record? Have they been previously violent? Have they ever struck you? Have they ever pushed you? Have they ever harmed you in any way? That's really important to note. In terms of looking at their criminal record, were those violent crimes? If they were, that could really raise red flags here. Were there any previous threats made, either face-to-face, through email, through social media, to other people? Is there a predatory characteristic about the person in the sense of following, seeking, showing up in places they shouldn't be? And again, I mentioned this, but is there substance use, alcohol, other types of use of substances that is abusive or addictive? Does the person have a sense of entitlement about the other person? Do they have anger issues? And in some cases, of course, do they have suicidal ideation? Do they think about harming themselves? And are they thinking about harming others? Do they have access to weapons? Are you aware whether they have access to weapons? And then what is their proximity to the victim? Do they live in the same town, work at the same place, have the same circle of friends? So thinking of things like that. So all those things can increase the likelihood and the risk that someone may be victimized. And then finally, here are just some very concrete risk factors for serious physical harm. We talked a little bit about the type of stalker who may physically, sexually, or extremely seriously, emotionally assault somebody.
Right.
In terms of homicide, intimate partner violence, and serious physical harm, here are the things to look for. Previous visits to the victim's home. Previous violence during stalking, so signs of violence in previous interactions. Threats to harm the target's children or their pets. And then this is really concrete, but notes.
Okay. Notes
on a victim's car, notes on their doorstep, in their mailbox, in places where they didn't know that person was.
Ones that burn up in their hands.
Yeah. Well, so some of this is ringing a bell for you. Yeah. I mean, it really gives context to this character.
Oh,
He's much more dangerous and threatening than...
Yeah. If this went on another week, Lord only knows. I mean, he's already burned down several buildings just trying to get her out of the city. And he's willing to burn down all of Gotham City using this special pyro gel. So it's it's almost like the longer he doesn't have her, the worse this is going to become.
Right. Well, and so this goes into the point that she's not necessarily doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
She certainly, it's not her fault that he's aggressively pursuing her and stalking her. At the same time, I think she did the right thing to fire him.
Yeah.
Why, there needs to be some boundary set. The next step would be reporting him.
Yeah.
and filing it with the police.
The one thing she did wrong is if you're going to fire someone right before your show, you should probably have them escorted from the building.
Totally.
Don't let them get behind the controls.
Yes, absolutely.
What'd you think of this episode?
I thought it was really serious. I really did appreciate the seriousness of it.
One listener actually mentioned via Twitter at our Arkham Sessions account that the character who we don't see again was banned by the Suits because potentially he believes one of the writers mentioned that character was a little too realistic. The sort of pyromaniac / stalker character hit a little too close to real, and therefore we never saw Firefly again.
Yeah.
At least not in this series. We see him later in other series.
Well, from a broader perspective, what happens to us as viewers of the show, we, especially thinking of women, we're seeing a lot of women in intimate partner, in relationships that show intimate partner violence, and women who are terrorized and stalked and victimized. I would even say that we're seeing more of this. And I know we're actually very soon, we're going to encounter a few more empowered women, and Batgirl is more visible in, these new adventures. And she's very independent, empowered, and she's not victimized in these ways. But I'm just noting that we're seeing a lot of this, very adult, very serious relationship patterns and interactions that do victimize women. And, I'm certainly not saying this is a product of all the writers or this is a conspiracy. I'm just wondering, it was the mid-90s, and maybe this was kind of consistent with what was shown in the media. I don't know that this would happen as much right now.
Oh, it would definitely not happen as much right now. Do you think that's why there are multiple appearances of very lighthearted comedies, such as What Are You Doing Tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky.
What?
Never mind.
So you're saying that some of those jokes are useful to temper the more serious topics? Yeah, I mean, for sure. Just like any other episode, this episode has a lovely balance of humor and entertainment and excitement, action. And then, of course, because it's the animated series, there's a serious element to it. That's why I love this show. I just think that we're certainly seeing a pattern of women being shown kind of in this more, kind of victimized way. And they don't, by the end of the episode, overcome it themselves. That it's always somebody else. Maybe this is because there are a lot of male writers. Maybe this is because these seem to be the tropes that are more popular in the mid-90s. I don't know. There's what was happening. Melrose Place, like lots of, like what were I don't know.
It was 97. So, I'm sure there were a bunch of those.
Party of Five.
But not necessarily on kids' animated series.
I don't know. I'm trying to contextualize it. At the time, I don't think anyone would be that concerned with it. But I think now the show would have a different reaction.
Yeah. So I'm very excited about next week's episode, The Ultimate Thrill, where we get to meet another brand new character, Roxy Rocket. I think you're probably pretty excited
So many
about
people love Roxy Rocket.
Roxy Rocket.
Yeah.
Very
It'll
lovable.
be fun.
You're going to love it. That's coming up next week. You know what else is coming up next week, Drea?
San Diego Comic-Con.
Yes. And a panel that I tweeted it earlier this week. It might be the culmination of this entire podcast. This is where this whole thing has been leading. Tell the folks why.
This is the first time we will have a panel solely dedicated to the psychology of Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah.
It's a special presentation by the Arkham Sessions, so you and I will be hosting this panel. And we are so honored to be joined by Paul Dini and Alan Burnett, who were so crucial to the development of the show in terms of writing and production. And then Brendan Fletcher, our friend and wonderful writer at DC Comics who's a huge fan of the Batman animated series shows, and I'm super excited about it. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, and if you don't know Brendan is one of the writers behind Gotham Academy, Batgirl. He's doing Motor Crush right now. He did a Black Canary run. So this guy knows his stuff, and he absolutely loves the series, and he likes talking Batman the Animated Series with us whenever we get an opportunity. So we absolutely had to have him on the panel with Paul Dini and Alan Burnett. When is that panel?
So the panel will be Saturday night of San Diego Comic-Con, and it will be at 7 o'clock in room 25
ABC. Yep, 25 ABC, 7 p.m. on Saturday of Comic-Con. You should come check out the Arkham Sessions, the psychology of Batman the Animated Series with Dr. Andrea Letamendi, myself, Paul Dini, Alan Burnett, and Brendan Fletcher. Oh, I'm getting the chills just thinking about it right now.
It's going to be so amazing.
And by the way, we've still got time. So if you decide that you have a question that you're just burning to ask on a panel like this, when you've got somebody like Alan Burnett and Paul Dini sitting there ready to answer them for you, why don't you send us a tweet? Why don't you send us an email? Drea, where can folks find you to give you those tweets and emails?
On Twitter, I'm at Arkham Asylum Doc. On Instagram, I'm Arkham Asylum Doc. My website is underthemaskonline.com. If you want to send me an email, there's a contact page. You are on Twitter as well.
Yes, I am at bward028, and you can find us both. We are at Arkham Sessions on Twitter. On Instagram, we are Arkham Sessions on Instagram. I am B_Ward028, and you should email us. We are arkhamsessions@gmail.com.
I think people, if there are folks out there who maybe can better articulate what I'm saying about some of the women on the show and the way that they're treated and how they're presented, please let us know. If you think maybe I'm on the right track, give us some evidence for that. If you think that they're treated no differently than male characters, maybe that's the case. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Yeah, definitely. You should also go find our family over at Fanbase Press. They are at fanbase_press on Twitter and fanbasepress.com. Go check them out. Until next time, I am Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
Good girl.